now, if everyone's back from their comfort breaks and ready for the next paper, is we'll move on to the final paper of this morning, which is from Amy Staniforth. Amy is responsible for metadata at Aberystwyth University Information Services, particularly bibliographical and open access publication cataloguing. She is also co-chair of the Wales Higher Education Forum Wealth Cataloguing Group, but has recently been preoccupied by a new job share, and having colleagues to talk about metadata with. So can I ask for that presentation to be started now, please?
Big ambitions, the highs and lows of getting what you ask for. So I'm going to give a brief introduction of me, the project, and my interviewees. Talk a bit about some of the emerging themes that came out of this project, and just wrap up with a few lessons learned. So I'm the resource discovery team leader. I am currently part-time and part of a job share, but I was full-time between 2013 and 2019, and we work at a grade 7. And our team is responsible for all of the bibliographic metadata in the library at Aberystwyth, and that's print and electronic. We're also responsible for any of the metadata related to open access and making our scholarly outputs discoverable. So at Aberystwyth, we've been going through restructuring for quite a long time, and the resulting restructure in the library meant that in 2019, some colleagues were newly part-time, and the vacant cataloguing role in my own team disappeared. So this was the context when I went down to 2 days a week in July, with just my 0.5 grade 4 colleague who works on open access making up our tiny team. Moving as university recruitment seems to do, it was December by the time my job share partner was able to start. It was at this time that management had started to notice the physical presence of uncatalogued donations and standing orders. After declining an offer of a temporary grade 3 support because I felt that I couldn't supervise and train someone new and inexperienced when I was only in for 2 days a week, my alternative to recruit part-time grade 6 colleagues to come in for a day, a week, for a month was miraculously accepted, and these 2 colleagues were ready to start along with my job share in December, January. So suddenly I needed to show 3 people who all worked different days to me and to each other how to catalogue. I learned cataloguing very informally, and I've certainly never been in a position to train anyone. So I started by managing to get a few days for us all to work together and to eat pizza, which I think helps. I talked through the mark fields in our library management system, Alma, for a range of items in the mornings, and then my trainees each took the wheel in Alma in the afternoons, and we catalogued items together. We moved generally from physical description to form fields and codes to controlled vocabularies, subject headings and classification. We concentrated on donated collections, which hadn't been touched since I'd been part-time. The first was a contained collection of books on photography from roughly the 1960s to the early 2000s. This was an ideal collection for training copy cataloguers because it was interesting, but also bibliographically quite consistent, with records readily available. Once this was completed, and that was a great moment in itself because it was a large collection and had been waiting for a long time, then we moved on to the rather more eclectic donations. My 3 new colleagues twice, each face-to-face, then transcribe the interviews and hopefully report any findings at the Metadata and Discovery Conference in September. But now to get to my interviewees. I've picked some icons to represent my colleagues to indicate the primary speaker in each clip. I've chosen artwork for Lloyd. From an undergraduate degree in the history of art, he got a library traineeship in the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, then worked at Newport Public Library while going to the library school at University of Western England. Then he was a trainee at the Courtauld Institute of Art, after which he did his PhD at the School of Art in Aberystwyth, working with the National Library of Wales on a project to digitise an art collection. After that, he became the subject librarian for law, art, Welsh and Celtic studies and history at Aberystwyth University. After our first few days training together, Lloyd worked then on a Monday when I was in the office until lockdown when we all worked at home. For Simon, I chose a book, ideally an old, rare book. Simon claims he's an accidental librarian. He came to Aberystwyth after a career as a specialist bookseller, and after some volunteering became a graduate trainee. That meant that he worked in every area of the library over a year, and then he never left, becoming our subject librarian for international politics, geography and earth sciences, maths, physics and computer sciences. After our first few days all training together, Simon then worked on Fridays when I was not in the office. So we had to catch up the following week or chat via email when I was at work in my other job. What we called the famous Friday emerged out of this situation, and you'll hear Simon refer to it a few times, when the photography collection had been completed and Simon was in the office by himself trying to catalogue the remnants of the donation trolley. And I'd been in meetings all day and unable to answer his questions. It was an unpleasant reminder of how being on your own can be quite dispiriting. Finally, I've given John a fiddle icon. John's being a folk musician was a good indicator, I felt, of his and the training team's wider interests and expertise. I've known John since before my library job, when we'd have tea with our colleague Anthony, sharing gossip and sometimes the stress about our jobs, often his as the university's copyright and data protection officer. I concocted this job share plan, and John was persuaded that it might be what we both needed. As we both continue to deal with the fallout this year, I haven't yet asked him if he has any regrets. But the interview I conducted with John told me so much more about his career than I knew. After an undergraduate degree in history, he got a diploma in management and then his library qualification at Aberystwyth. He then returned to Lampeter to teach a sort of computing and management and informatics, but eventually took up the opportunity to get a PhD from Kent, working on legal literature for the 19th century short title catalogue. After some extramural teaching, John then started at Aberystwyth University Library, doing pretty much a bit of everything. This included external work, abstracting and indexing parliamentary papers, and collaborative University of Wales work on copyright, and the latter led him into his copyright and data protection role. John was able to overlap for a couple of weeks with my hours when he started, but after Christmas we settled into me doing Monday, Tuesday, and John doing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So our time for developing our job share partnership has been limited. Finally, I've given myself the sound icon because in part of my interest in oral history, but also because listening back to the recordings, I was initially appalled by how much I, the interviewer, kept talking. I've included myself here to acknowledge that I was both project coordinator, but also inextricably present as a participant too. And all these icons are credited at the end of the presentation. So what follows is a tiny slice of the more than 4 hours of recordings. So it's very partial, but I will make the interviews and transcripts available open access. But for now, I'm going to hand over to my interviewees.
I felt that was pretty good. I felt that it was a good way of doing things. I think the way we set it up was fine and worked well. From memory, I mean, you know, we did half a day of you explaining the theory to us, and then sort of another half day of practice, and then another day of practice, as I recall. And that was a really good grounding. And I felt that I had a bit of grounding anyway, because once we started doing it, a lot of the rare book cataloguing came back to me, because I know we haven't done that for a little while. So a lot of that started to come back to me, and I felt relatively okay with that. Yeah. So I think doing it is always the best way.
What would have been really nice is if we could have done that over consecutive days, I suppose. But also it would have been really nice if we weren't all part-time at different times, because it would be nice for that to have carried on in a sense, so that you could...
That would be an ideal scenario, because I feel that I keep bumping up against things on Fridays that I can't solve, and you know I'll be emailing you every 5 minutes, and that doesn't strike me as being useful resources use really. But
it's difficult, isn't it? Because you feel like you hit a wall and it's hard to keep the momentum going, isn't it? I mean,
and that is the trouble. Doing it 1 day a week also is a problem, because that first sort of hour on a Friday, maybe not an hour, but you know, once you having to think about how do I get back into this. But once I get back into it, it's fine.
I think no matter how experienced you got, you'd still have that thing of it would be worthwhile saying, can you come have a look at this with me?
feel it's petered out a bit too early. I think it was great in the beginning, and I think maybe you should have been a bit more forceful in let's do this, let's have a look at this, let's have a look at that. Mm-hmm. And I probably respond to that a bit better, but it was okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay. I mean, it's difficult getting back to the theory of cataloguing, then the systems you're using to catalogue, and then the different types of material as well, and the different sources, which also does my head in a bit.
So what have you found tricky?
How long have you got? Is there any tape? Oh, could be.
There'll be an alarm.
Sure. I think it is that bumping up against things, and this is just symptomatic of our situation that we find ourselves in as we're all working part-time. It's bumping up against things and being frustrated by things that I can't work out at the time. So things like class marks have been a bit tricky. It's just this week nothing had a class mark on it, and I take on board what you were saying about the workarounds earlier. On 650 fields, a lot of stuff came through without 650s on as well, so those sort of things. But I think other than that, I don't think it's been too bad. You may have a different view on that, having checked my work. You may have a list of things, but other than that, I haven't found it too bad. I mean, it was enjoyable doing the photography books. Mm-hmm. Less enjoyable last Friday doing those.
Part of what's been quite interesting for me is looking over your work and realising that might be a sort of annoying or intimidating, but at the same time, the things that I see are just as much things that I think, oh yeah, this is why somebody should be looking at my work, because there are lots of, sometimes it's just experience, but a lot of the time it's human error, just out of repetition.
I'm not learning new things as quickly possibly as I should be. No. So when you're not there, if I come up against something, I'm always going to be at that level, and I'm not going to go any further.
Yeah.
That's what concerns me. And that makes me feel then that I'm not contributing fully enough to the team.
No, I don't actually find it that annoying. No. I find it intriguing, and it makes me query, well, is this exactly, is this the right thing?
I love work. There are frustrations, obviously, but, like in any line work. But I know it seems stupid, but when your task is get that pile of books from that side of the desk to that side of the desk, there's a lot more to it than that. But just having it where you can just really get your teeth into something all day, a single thing, is really good.
Yeah.
But with this, I can see up until last week, I don't want to harp on about that, a huge pile of books, nicely catalogued, well, hopefully nicely catalogued. Yeah. I'm just trying to spare my crushed self-esteem for this. Yeah, and I do like that, and I feel I almost feel like it's a proper contribution, because something concrete is happening. Their books are being catalogued, they're going onto the shelf to be processed, and then they're going out into the library, and you can open up the library catalogue and see work that you've done. And that's very rare that you'll see that in the job that I do. I know that we're helping people, I do know that, and we do get that feedback from both students and staff, but this to me is a much more concrete example of work being done.
You could possibly say that my construction of the bibliography of 19th century legal literature was cataloguing in a way, because I was extracting various codes and fields from MARC records and pulling them into my own format, because when you publish a bibliography, you don't want all the crap.
I was a bit nervous because it was the other thing of, I'd never thought, I'm not a cataloguer. It was something that when I'd done previous work, it was, there'd be different mistakes and things like that. Just the way I got the mode of thinking that I was much better with the sort of user side of library work. If we've been asked to do it at the same grade we're doing for our normal or everyday work, then it's a case of, right, yeah, no, you can't sort of rely on, oh, it's too hard, I'll put that back on the shelf, I'll leave that for the Ask Amy pile and what have you. It's just like, well, no, learn how to fix it.
There were some very, very tiny little pamphlets that were bilingual in English and Welsh, and they were very short, very small publication with no copies elsewhere, and such like, and things like that were very difficult to try and get to grips with and to work on. And again, I don't know how much progress I made in actually getting to grips with those. Let's put it that way, rather than me just saying, oh, I ignored them.
Like, I found that I was more experienced than I thought I was, if you know what I mean. Not that I could have sat and done it, but there were, you know, you did remember certain things. And even if you hadn't done that, your experience as doing things as a subject librarian in terms of the sort of finding aspect, you put the jigsaws into place.
It's nice to see the email that you sent around the other day showing it on Primo, on Library Hub. You think, right, those things I've done today definitely made a difference, you know, right, or whether they've been done very well or otherwise, it's made some kind of difference.
Welsh literature, something like that. If you improved a very sparse record and put it up, it's not like there was loads of good records about there. You know, there's good. So you know, you've done something.
Yeah, harder to do, but sort of more satisfying because you're
giving back to the community.
You hero.
What I was also hoping to get out of it, it would give me assistance, if that's the right word, to do my job that I do 4 days a week. So it would help me facilitate searches for students, you know, and it'd be interesting to see how the back end of the library catalogue worked. So things like subject headings and the controlled vocabularies are those sort of 650 fields that we use, because those are something that I promote, and they're also always the students are always very keen to see those.
And usually it's, I need help finding scholarly sources for my topic. That's a general thing. But quite often to like get around that, I'll ask them, can you bring one thing you've used with you? Doesn't matter if it's a book, article, if your lecturer's recommended something, can you just bring something with you that you found useful? Doesn't matter if they haven't found anything at all. Because then I try to use the catalogue with the students to introduce the tools they can use within that. So if they said, oh, I've used this book, and they've got it in front of them, saying, right, okay, so then we look up the record on the public-facing side of things there, even though they have it, and like sometimes they'll be like, I know that's useful, that's why I brought it. But we look at that, so then we do things like, right, let's look at the subject headings here. How is this book described? And then saying, oh, right, oh, yeah, it is actually about that. So, and then try to do like a 20-second description of what classification is and what I control. Let's say you're trying to explain, okay, just click on that.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you've got another 12 books that you know are on that topic there. So that is something I've sort of done quite a lot with students there, and I think it's quite a neat way then of introducing just some of the functions of, you know, using the OPAC. Hey, old school.
Vander Broughton's book on classification is really useful. Have you got it there? You swat.
I do.
Yes, essential. That's the subject heading one, isn't it?
So having had colleagues to talk to about cataloguing for the first time in a long time, to laugh with and work through problems together was really great for me. and I'm so grateful for their time and having had their words to listen to during lockdown. I realised listening back, I had certain assumptions about what I thought was problematic for metadata in our libraries. And I was at times quite frustrated that my interviews didn't seem to be that interested in my theories. But instead, eventually, I realised that they all kept coming back to subject headings and classification, and that I should probably notice this. And over the summer, subject headings have proved to be a really good vehicle for us as a team to propose changes, but also new processes. We may not have much, but our colleagues really are a fantastic resource and really interesting. They're smart, diverse, engaged and professional. Ultimately, I think my plan to have us all come together and catalogue and eat pizza was a good one. Where it fell down was having a future plan that could really accommodate our differing hours and little capacity. And I think my job shared partner in particular has suffered. But hopefully he's going to keep sticking with it, because I know I'm certainly benefiting from his company and perspective. And finally, there was a really interesting set of reflections on the satisfying sort of work that cataloguing is. But I'm going to end on that tantalising thought. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Amy. I found that quite fascinating, actually, because I think what we see there that you're experiencing in Aberystwyth, I am sure is being repeated across the country. So thank you very much for that insight into what you're doing in Aberystwyth. We do have a question already. It comes from Victoria, and she says, with colleagues doing cataloguing alongside their usual duties, and in brackets I assume, did they find they could prioritise it enough? Were there strategies they used or direction from senior management to allow them to focus on the cataloguing?
I think, thank you. Well, thanks for the question, and thank you to all of the conference organisers, which I didn't say in my talk. We were in a slightly unusual situation, as I sort of hinted at, in that we'd had this restructure, and so my job share, it was just really up to us to sort out when we could overlap. And so we've managed with not very much time, but we manage it ourselves. And I think that's beginning to get better. A few months in, 6 months in. With Simon and Lloyd, it was slightly different, that they had been full-time people up until the restructure, and they went down to 4 days a week. One of them didn't work on a Monday, and one of them didn't work on a Friday in the academic engagement team. So we basically just sort of pounced on them. We've got a good relationship, and I kind of knew that they might go for it, to sort of say, well, look, for 3 months, would you give us that 1 day a week? So we just had to go with those particular days. And when they came in, they just did cataloguing. And I think they were quite firm about that themselves. I think having gone through a restructure and really having to have, and I work with them in the trade union on it, having to defend your own job, explain what you do and why it's really important. Although it was a very difficult experience, it was also quite empowering. So I think there was this level of like, well, if I'm going to come in and do that, it was a right faff, obviously, getting it all through HR and pay and all that sort of stuff. But in terms of priorities, that worked quite well. I think it would be slightly different, like if you have ongoing roles and you're expected to manage them both on the same day. And I just think that wouldn't have worked at all. So everybody was quite flexible, which was good. But it needed to be very clear, because otherwise, even I'm sure everybody who is on this in this meeting now, it's really hard to prioritize your own time when you're cataloging. And as one of the things we did talk about was how you always save the fun stuff till yourself. So, you know, when we were talking about doing the nice things and what they liked about cataloging, I was often saying, yeah, I never get to do that either, because it's always for somebody else to do. Or it's the thing that you leave till the very end and then you don't get time.
Yeah, absolutely. A question that I have for you is based on your experience so far with training and having new colleagues to train. What would you have welcomed in this situation? What kind of resources would you have liked to be able to ease these people onto this career route then?
It's a bit boring and probably not a useful answer for everybody else, but as you could probably tell, it would have been time together, because it was so nice all sitting in a room talking about cataloguing, doing it and getting the answers to questions while we're there working through them, and that is just, I think, absolutely priceless. So that would have been fantastic, and for other people to perhaps have prioritised that more, more senior people to have prioritised that on our behalf. In terms of sort of things like resources, what I'm realising now, because I am doing a bit of work into Library of Congress subject headings for the Wales Higher Education Library Forum, and so I'm doing a bit of training myself, and I'm finding out all sorts of things I didn't know anything about, particularly to do with ClassWeb, for example. So that's a resource we use. I've always used it in a very tunnel vision kind of way, and now I'm learning that it can do all these amazing things I didn't know about. And I think perhaps some assistance with how to use those tools in lots of different ways. So you might end up only using it in one way, but it would be really nice to be able to maximise the tools that we've got. And yes, that's a bit of time, but perhaps also a little bit of training might be useful even for those of us who are using those tools. I might have made a bit more of that and made it a nicer experience, I think, for my trainees.
And we've had a question come in. I'm afraid I can't give you the name because it's just a series of numbers. So 824-5077-1924, this is for you. Did you find it hard to decide how you would structure your training? I find it hard to explain cataloguing to others without jumping around too much and probably confusing them.
Yes, absolutely. And so it was a panic couple of weeks before Christmas, and I was trying to work out the best way of doing it. And I think what also has come out for me, sort of doing the interviews and then listening much more carefully, is that I had two quite different audiences in a sense. I had these two people who were going to be doing it for a little while, and I got that. I think I was, by just getting them straight into Alma and not worrying too much about the other stuff. I knew they were intellectually interested in that other stuff already, so that's why I think it's really important that people come in at an appropriate, either an appropriate grade or an appropriate experience, just somebody who's already quite interested, so you don't have to kind of jump that hurdle. But on the other hand, I had somebody who needed to suddenly get up to my speed, so that he could take decisions when I'm not there. And I think that I'm still I think we both say we're not quite there yet. That was more difficult, but the actual sitting down and it was definitely the right place to start. I think was just get everybody was already had a login for Alma, so watching me do a couple, asking all the questions that they wanted to ask as we went, taking as long as we want, and then sort of filling in the gaps around, so I had a list of things I wanted to cover, but we kind of let that emerge, and then I'd make sure we cover, we were generally doing, as I think I said, we started with descriptive cataloguing, because that I think is the bit that people associate with what we do, and then the form stuff, form fields, which people are like, ooh, what are they? And then I think the more kind of linked data type stuff and controlled vocabularies, which people are very interested in, but often don't really understand, not that I do, but how it links up with other people's systems and vocabularies. And I think that was quite a nice move, certainly up to a point, and beyond that point we just didn't have any time, so I wouldn't know quite how to keep going necessarily with that.
Yeah. Right, that's great, and magically we've come to the end of that part of the morning. So thank you very much for that presentation, Amy. I certainly found it fascinating. And I'm sure that within the metadata and discovery group, we'll be thinking a lot about the points that you made there. Right, thank you, Amy. So